Welcome to the Dolby Music Community Sessions. I'm Ben Givarz with the Dolby Creator Lab. And in this month's session, we have from Dolby, Content Technical Solutions Engineer Emma Brooks joining us again, and Dolby's Staff Content Services Engineer from our UK team, Rich Addis, making his sessions debut. And they are going to get into the latest and greatest when it comes to DART and room calibrations. Emma will be sharing the all-new training modules she and the team have developed for mixed room design and the DART, which of course is the Dolby Atmos room design tool. This training is completely free and available to all at learning.dolby.com, and it offers in-depth guidance on designing Dolby Atmos mixed rooms, covering essential topics such as speaker placement, LFE, bass management, hardware selection, acoustic considerations. There's an exercise on creating a DART, awesome stuff, and the training can be used for studios involved in not only mixing music, but non-theatrical post-production, gaming, and podcast content as well. We will get into that with Emma in just a moment. Following Emma, Rich Addis shares a deep dive into room calibration fundamentals, including room alignment, SPL, loudness, target curves, and level settings. If you want to know all the details on target curves versus EQ curves and the music curve, Rich is going to get into all of that in plenty of detail. He's going to break out the slides and diagrams, so stay tuned and be sure to add your questions with your name in big marker. As always, Greg Stryke Chin is here with his pro tips, and this month he starts a new series focused on leveraging effects sends in your Dolby Atmos sessions, this time in Pro Tools, and today is going to show how to set up a multi-channel reverb plugin to use on a virtual instrument and create sends to beds and objects. This is truly great creative stuff with Greg going into the studio, so stay tuned for that demo. You don't want to miss it, and be sure to add your questions as well. Before we jump into that, some exciting news to share on the Atmos toolset. If you caught last month's session, Dolby's Jordan Glasgow shared a sneak peek of the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler version 2.0, and that is now publicly available in the all-new Dolby Professional Store, which is at professionalstore.dolby.com. That's right, the all-new Dolby Professional Store is where you can get the Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision creation tools directly from Dolby. So tools such as the Dolby Atmos Render and the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler, and for Vision, Dolby Vision single certifications and Dolby Vision trim licenses. Again, that's at Dolby Professional Store, professionalstore.dolby.com. And the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler version 2.0 new features include crossfade functionality, which allows you to create and edit crossfades between Dolby Atmos clips. You've got user selectable channel mapping options for crossfades to preserve channel layout and optimize for artifact-free crossfades. You can now move clips with crossfades in slip mode, and there are also crossfade artifact warnings for potential audio issues. There's loudness measurement support for crossfaded clips and songs with crossfades, and a number of other features as well. Check out last month's music community session for a demo with Jordan. There's also a What's New video with Bennett at the pro site, professional.dolby.com. And again, get those tools at the new Dolby Professional Store, which is available internationally for all countries. You can also still purchase at the Avid store for now as well. Also, in last month's session, Dolby's John Scanlon, who leads academic partnerships with Dolby Creator Lab, shared the new learning.dolby.com site with newly redesigned music curriculums, including Pro Tools 100, 200, and 300 level courses, the Music Essentials course with new video training, tons of downloadable exercise content with templates and real sessions with music, including for Logic, Pro Tools, Ableton Live, the Music Panner, and more. There's also Dolby Vision training and the DART training we mentioned earlier. So much good stuff happening at learning.dolby.com with John and all the teams that contribute to that. Be sure to check it out. Also, as always, the professional site continues to evolve. It's much easier to navigate now, and it links to the knowledge base with new articles on room design, mixing, and DAWs, plus links to the FAQs and the user forum where you can connect with Dolby's engineers for support and best practices. So much good stuff there as well. So shout out to Matt, Bennett, John, and the team for all the great work they've done and put into that. There's always a ton of great resources there, and of course, they're always free. Okay, so let's jump into Greg's pro tips. We'll follow that with Emma Brooks on the mixed room design and DART training, and then we'll go to Rich Addis on room calibration and curves. Enter your questions now. All right, my partner in the music community sessions and friend, Mr. Greg Stryke Chin, is here as always from his new Dolby Atmos music studio in Miami. And we're going to get into the next series of his pro tips, and this will focus on different ways to leverage FX sends, starting with reverbs. Greg, what is up? Great to see you, man.
Great to be here, Ben. Thank you so much. As always, great to be here. And yeah, we are going to talk a little bit over the course of the next couple of weeks about leveraging effect sends for Dolby Atmos mix. We're going to focus on reverb, just use that as kind of our main effect, but this will apply to delay or any other creative effects you might want to leverage in a mix. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll talk about different ways to kind of instantiate that and use that in your session. And we're going to start with kind of the most common and easiest one today. So today what we're going to do is, you can see here I'm in Pro Tools. I have a little ARP set up here that, with a virtual instrument, just a very simple 5/4 ARP, very, very simple. And what we're going to do is, that's totally dry. That's actually right now it lives in the bed. What we want to do today is I'm going to show you how to set up multi-channel reverb plugin and then be able to send that back to the bed, to a 712 bed. So again, we have nothing else set up right now, just our first piece of music, our arpeggio. So what we want to do is we want to be able to apply that reverb to any number of objects or bed tracks and then return that reverb back to the 712 bed. How do we do that? The first thing we need to do is set up an aux. A 712 aux. So to do that here, now I'm doing this in Pro Tools, but of course, I know all of you out there are really beautiful critical thinkers and will be able to take the information out of here and apply it to your DAW of choice if you're not in Pro Tools. So the first thing we're going to do here is we want to set up our 7.1.2 aux input track. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. We're going to pull up a new 712 aux. And I'm going to go ahead and name that reverb. And I always like to capitalize that and take out the consonants so we can create that. And here it is. Here's our aux. And as you can see here, 712. Now there's no input, and we're going to go ahead and first send this to our bed. So it returns back to the bed, right? So our 712 bed, but we have no input set up yet. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set up our input. And to do that, in Pro Tools, we're going to go into our setup menu and our IO menu. And we're going to go ahead and go to our bus tab, and we're going to set up a new path. Now, that new path is, you guessed it, is going to be a 712 path. And we're going to call that just reverb. Now, for me, RVRB, all caps. Go ahead and click create. And if I scroll all the way down on my buses here, you can see that I now have a 7.12 input or bus. Click OK. And now on our reverb aux here, we can go to our input, and right when I open it up on our input, I go right to bus, and you can see our reverb, our 7.1.2 reverb input is there. Click that. We are almost set up. The next thing we're going to do now is we need to add our reverb. Now, for this example today, we're only going to be using the standard, stock plugin, no multi-channel reverb specifically, just stock deverb. So in our first insert here, we're going to go ahead and go to multi-channel plugin, and let's go ahead and find our reverb. Sorry, multi-mono and reverb and deverb, and there it is. There's our deverb plugin. Now let's set it up for success. We want to make sure our gain is all the way up. Our wet signal is 100% because it's only going to be taking in dry signal and then outputting that. We don't want to mix another dry signal with that. So this is going to be a 100% wet signal, and I'm just going to go ahead just so we can actually hear a really big difference. Make it a big church reverb and with a really nice big decay for the example. Okay, so that's set up. So now what we want to do is actually go ahead and leveraging our arpeggio here. Let's first go ahead and we can leave it in the bed. It currently lives in the bed. And if we wanted to start sending that, all I need to do is now click on my send on that track. And we're going to go ahead and go to our bus and go to our reverb send here. And you can see here that now our reverb send pops up along with our send channel and, of course, a panner for it. So if I go ahead and start playing this back, start adding reverb, and of course, as I'm panning around in the bed, you can see there on our reverb meter outputs that it's going to act accordingly. You can hear the difference a little bit. Now, of course, the same thing applies if I want to go ahead and turn this arpeggio into an object. Simply, I'm just going to have this be object 11, and then make sure that's now active, and same thing applies. I now have that object, and I'm able to pan that reverb wherever I need it to be in the session. It's that simple. Now again, that's our first example. Next time what we'll do is I'll show you how to do the same kind of thing, but we're going to actually leverage an actual multi-channel reverb plugin, and we're going to send that to an object bed. So a little bit different, and there's some changes there that I'll walk you through, but very similar, a little bit different, but also very cool. All right, so we'll do that one next time. I hope you find that helpful. This is a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And I'll say thank you. We'll take all your questions, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ben.
Awesome, Greg. Thanks. Yeah, everybody, add your questions for Greg and learn how to use and leverage effects sends so that you can accent your creativity in Dolby Atmos. Great stuff, Greg. Thanks, man. All right, so happy to welcome back to the Music Community Session Dolby's Emma Brooks. Hi, Emma. So good to see you. And thank you for doing this again.
You too, Ben. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Anytime. So before we get into the new training modules that you've developed for Mixed Room Design and DART, I'm sure most people know you from your many years at Dolby and out in the field at studios and events. But can you just share a little bit about your role at Dolby for those that may not know?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. For those who don't know me, my name's Emma Brooks. I'm Content and Technical Solutions Engineer at Dolby on our Partner Success and Support team. So my primary role is really supporting our third-party partners, our certified service partners, and all the great folks in the field who are doing fantastic design, integration, and calibration work, as well as always, working with the great folks at studios across North America who are enabling their space for Dolby Atmos.
And that is a lot of studios, and you have been an integral part in a lot of those coming online. So congratulations on everything you've achieved and will continue to do so. And I know you've done a lot of work to evolve the DART tool, but just as like a quick refresher on that, can you remind us what that tool is and how it's used in relation to room design?
Absolutely. Yeah. The DART, or the Dolby Atmos Room Design tool, is an interactive Microsoft Excel tool that can assist the user with designing a Dolby Atmos mixed room by providing real-time feedback and recommendations on speaker placement as well as speaker performance within the room. We've developed that tool quite a bit over the past couple of years to be more accessible and provide more information about things like acoustic considerations, commissioning factors, and things like that. And so it's a great resource available for free on professionalsupport.dolby.com.
Awesome. Totally great resource. We share it a lot on the music community sessions. Obviously, we talk about it a ton out in the field, and you've got a lot of visibility into many of the studios and the best practices for them. So let's talk a little bit about the elements of the training module and what sort of things that covers. And I think, really maybe like it's some of the most important aspects of the whole Dolby Atmos world, right? Like you've got to start with the right placement, the right space, and the calibration. Take us a little bit into the training and what you were looking to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. So we're super excited to share that we've launched this new self-paced Dolby Atmos Mixed Room Design and DART training on our learning management platform. So the course dives really deep into concepts needed for designing a Dolby Atmos mixed room, topics like speaker placement, hardware selection, acoustic considerations, LFE and bass management, room calibration, and each section includes a mix of text, graphics, and interactive content, with most modules also featuring short videos that show how these concepts apply to the DART and walking through that real-world use of the tool. The information in the course is applicable to studios involved in mixing music, podcast, gaming, and non-theatrical post-production content. Of course, for any information about theatrical studios or the theatrical Dolby Atmos Room Design tool, we always refer to professional.dolby.com/cinema and then the content services webpage there. But the course is completely free. It's open to anyone, whether you're a professional studio designer, a pro audio integrator, or you're just simply exploring these concepts for use in your own studio project. We hope that you find it engaging and helpful. And it's super easy to get started. Just visit learning.dolby.com, create a free account, and navigate through the course at your own pace. So we hope it's a valuable resource for the community. If you do check it out, we as always, look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback.
That's awesome, Emma. Love that it's free. Love that you've done so much work to evolve this tool, but also the training around it based on the needs from, studios and mix engineers in the field, and I'm sure our professional community as well. So just really happy to see this, and I'm sure it feels good to share it with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much for letting me share, Ben. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, Emma. And if you have questions for Emma, please be sure to add those into Big Marker with your name, and we'll answer those shortly. All right, so pleased to welcome Staff Content Services Engineer from Dolby's UK Commercial Partnerships team. Rich Addis joins the Music Community Sessions for the first time. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
So great to have you. I'm sure many of our viewers know you already from all the work you do in the UK and around the world, but can you share a little bit about your role at Dolby for those who may not know?
Yeah, sure. So I work within the Music Partnerships team here in the UK. We work with anyone and everyone who's involved in the creation stage of Dolby Atmos music. So that can be mix engineers, label people, studio owners, anyone and everyone. So it can be anything from kind of the design of the studios, so working with the DART tool, all the technical guidelines, getting people to put studios together which hit our best practices guidelines, all the way through to starting to use that studio to deliver really great quality Dolby Atmos music content.
Love it. So I know you work very closely with our certified service partners in the UK and elsewhere, and you've had a lot of feedback from them. You field a lot of questions, if you will, on the differences between calibration curves for like cinema, post, and music, and certainly a lot of topic of SPL matching and whatnot. But before we get into the curves and the SPL, I was hoping you could share just a little bit about the Certified Service Partner Program for those that may not be aware.
Sure. So the Certified Service Partner Program, or the CSP program, as we refer to it, it's a collection of our kind of reseller and integrator partners. So we've worked really hard internally as a team over the last 4 or 5 years, doing a lot of the kind of design and integration and implementation work within Dolby Atmos music studios. And as we continue to grow and continue to scale the footprint of music studios internationally, we needed to bring more people into the folds to be able to deliver that level of quality as we continue to grow and continue to scale. So we distilled all of that learning and all of that knowledge that myself and my colleagues internationally had learned by going into all of these amazing studios and doing the builds and the setups. And we condensed that into a training program where we go out and we teach these CSP partners to be able to deliver very high quality Dolby Atmos studios to our specification, to our guidance.
That's great. And congratulations on all the work you've done to establish and grow that program. I think it's really key to have, our partners in the field educated and creating their own businesses out of these opportunities out there in the world for Dolby Atmos studios. So that's awesome. So let's get into the system calibration, SPL, and target curves. I'll hand it over to you. These are incredibly important elements of tuning your studio and making sure that you are going to ensure translation and are meeting and employing best practices. So let's get into this. I'll hand it to you, and feel free to just roll through it. And if folks have questions for Rich, please be sure to add them into Big Marker with your name, and we will answer those shortly.
Great. So thanks, Ben. So system calibration is a big topic. It's a complex topic. We're not going to touch on anywhere close to all of it, but something that comes up time and time again is target curves or EQ curves. And you can't really start talking about target curves and EQ curves without also understanding SPL. They're kind of interplay with one another. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to start really kind of first principles. So what is SPL, sound pressure level? Why do we need a calibrated reference level at all? What actually dictates how loud playback is in your studio? And then we'll get into why do we have target curves? What are some of the most common ones? How do they interrelate? How do they interact with one another? and why can level setting actually end up being more complicated than it might first appear. And then we'll do some tips right at the very end for accurately level setting your studio system. So let's get into it. So first of all, let's have a think about what the fundamentals are. What are the building blocks of a well-calibrated system? So we split this out into a mixture of objective criteria and one subjective criteria. So on the objective criteria side, that's three main things. Time alignment is pretty straightforward. We want all of the audio to reach the mix position at the same time. But then we've got SPL setting and the consistency of the loudspeaker frequency response. Now, these two things are kind of interdependent, so that's what we're going to be covering off today. The final part of the process is the subjective part, and that's what the overall frequency response of the system is. So we want to have a consistent frequency response, but what is that consistent frequency response? And there's recommendations there. We've got our kind of own guidance, but at the end of the day, it's subjective. It's got to work for you, and it's got to allow you to translate mixes out of your studio and out into the real world. That's the overall goal of what studio calibration is all about. It's about ensuring translation out into the real world. So let's get into sound pressure levels. So very high level, what is sound pressure level, or SPL? Well, in simple terms, it's a measure of the acoustic energy present at a point in space at a certain point in time. Now, sound pressure is measured in pascals, and a pascal, if you're interested, is equal to 1 Newton of force per meter squared. But that's not super useful to us in the kind of audio sense. So we convert pascals into decibels in order to give us something which is a bit more useful and on a scale that kind of makes sense to us. So once you've converted pascals and sound pressure into decibels, 0 dB is the threshold of hearing. So that's as quiet as it can go before we just don't perceive it at all. 60 dB, round about the middle of the range, is kind of roughly what conversational level is in day-to-day speech. And then you've got 120 dB right up at the top end, would be like you're standing next to a jet engine as it's taking off, something like that. Now, there might be other things that kind of you read about or you see in relation to sound pressure level, things like weighting. We'll get into that shortly, and averaging, things like fast or slow. We'll cover all of that kind of stuff off. But at a high level, SPL, it's a single numerical value which gives us an idea as to what energy is present in a room or in a space at a certain point in time. Now, that single value of SPL can be kind of useful, but it doesn't actually tell us anything about the underlying signal or the frequency profile of that underlying signal. We can do that, and we can get a sense of what that frequency balance in the room is by splitting it out across the frequency spectrum. We do that using RTA trace measurements. So an RTA trace, it's a real-time analyzer trace. It's basically, we're going through the frequency band and we're filtering it off frequency band by frequency band, and then presenting it as a line graph. If I switch this across to a bar graph, rather than a line graph, maybe makes it slightly less readable if we're wanting to do EQing from it, but I think it starts making a bit more sense in terms of what we're actually seeing here. So you can see that within each kind of bar on the graph, that there's obviously energy present. Now, in principle, SPL, that kind of final single numerical value, is kind of just a sum of all of the energy that's in each of these individual buckets. Now, what we see here is split out into third octave banding. That just means that the full frequency spectrum, the 10 octaves between 20 hertz and 20K, we've split each of those 10 octaves into 3 to give us the third octave buckets. So we're basically just taking that full range signal, filtering it by these third octave kind of band centers, and then presenting it as a graph. And that gives us an idea of actually what's present in terms of individual frequencies within the room. So rather than just a single numerical value we get with SPL, we can now critically analyze and assess what's going on under the hoods on a frequency by frequency basis. Okay, so we can now measure a signal, but we need to know what the signal is that we're actually measuring. So to do that, we need a calibrated reference. So to do that, we have Dolby calibrated noise. So Dolby calibrated noise is the noise that you'll get out of the Dolby Atmos renderers speaker calibration window. Within there, you've got a signal generator, and you can output Dolby calibrated noise from that signal generator. Dolby calibrated noise is kind of a pink noise signal. It pretty much is pink noise, but it has a slightly higher crest factor than the pink noise that you'd get out of another signal generator, be that in your DAW or elsewhere. In principle, Dolby calibrated noise should sit at about minus 20 dBFS. So the idea is that once you've calibrated your system, the system, through its specification of amplifier performance, of speaker performance, etc., the system should be able to reproduce 20 dB above that calibrated reference level. We ideally like it to have at least another 3 dB above that, just to be safe, to be able to deal with super transient things. But this is in large part what the DART tool that Emma mentioned before, the Dolby Atmos Room Design tool, is there to help you calculate and navigate through. So you can specify a system that is going to be able to perform when we calibrate using the Dolby reference noise and making sure we've got that 20 dB of headroom above that to deal with the peaks in the mix. Okay, so we know how to measure the signal. We know what reference signal we're going to use. But actually, having a calibrated reference still doesn't actually necessarily tell us how loud our mix is going to be in the room. Just because we've used a known reference, well, we could decide to still mix super low on the meters or super high on the meters. But we also need a specification in the digital realm to be able to kind of define how loud our mix is going to be. And that's where the average loudness specifications come into things. So for theatrical mixing, slightly different. It's a calibrated system, both on the creation stage and on the replay stage. So we can simply mix to a level within that calibrated environment that is satisfactory to us. So there is no kind of delivery spec necessarily in terms of average loudness for theatrical mixing. But within the kind of HE areas, we have various different specifications and also various different calibrated reference levels. And it's the interplay between having a mix delivered to a certain average loudness that is then replayed at a calibrated reference level, which is going to determine what the actual loudness and SPL we're going to get of the mix in the room is going to be. So here you can see we've got a range of different specifications and also a range of different calibrated levels that people will generally like to work at. So as we've talked about, theatrical, the calibrated reference level is 85 dBc. For home entertainment streaming, various different specifications, but one of the most common ones for Netflix, minus 27 LKFS. That's gated by dialogue. Not going to get into that here, but it's a key differentiation to make. And the calibrated reference level in the studio is probably going to be somewhere between about 79 to 82 dBc. But then go down to the bottom of the table and we look at music, for example. Music is delivering at minus 18 LKFS. So potentially up to kind of 9 dB hotter on the meters than the dialogue content within kind of streaming content. And we might be listening at a similar level or maybe even louder, 79 to 85 dBc. So obviously the average loudness is going to dictate kind of how much headroom you've got on the meters within your mix. And then it's the calibrated reference level that is going to dictate actually how loud that's going to present in the room itself. So why do we actually need this and why do we choose these levels? So, I mean, this is a massively complicated topic in and of itself, and you could go down a rabbit hole with this. But in large part, it comes down to the fact that we as humans don't actually perceive the relative level of different frequencies equally. So the graphs that you see here, really famous kind of study done by Fletcher and Munson. So these are the equal loudness contours or Fletcher-Munson curves. This is kind of like the frequency response of human hearing. But what you'll notice from this graph is that varies significantly with intensity. So the louder the sound, the flatter our perception gets. So at the very lowest level, if we look at the lowest line on this graph, the 0 FON line, which you can see right down at the bottom, down at sort of 30 hertz, you'd need over 60 dB of intensity before we even become sensitive to that frequency being present in a room. Whereas we look up at 1 kilohertz, which is the kind of reference point that all of these lines are set to, then 0 dB. So even if we get 1 dB of intensity at 1K, we'll start to notice it. Whereas down at 30 odd hertz, you need over 60. So you jump up to, say, the 80 FON line, kind of in the middle of the plot, and you can see there's only a few dB in it from the lowest end of the frequency spectrum up to the kind of mids and the top end. So yeah, we are far more balanced in our kind of sensitivity to frequencies across the range when we're listening at level. And just as an interesting kind of fun fact, this is basically the reason why stereos used to have that loudness button. It wasn't to give you more bass, but it was to bring up the low frequency levels to become audible when you're listening at low replay volumes, kind of in the evening or overnight, something like that. Maybe not how people use that button, but that's kind of in theory what it was there for. So in general, we're less sensitive to very low and very high frequencies, and you can see that from these curves here. So when it comes to actually measuring SPL, we don't really actually need to factor in these super low frequencies and super high frequencies. So that's where the idea of weighting comes in. So yeah, this is exactly what we do when we weight our SPL measurements. The most common ones that you'll probably come across on most standard SPL meters are C-weighted and A-weighted. And you can see those in the two graphs, the two plots on the graph here. So C-weighted is relatively flat, but there's a bit of a tail off in the low frequencies and in the high frequencies. And then A-weighted disregards or kind of weights down a huge amount of the LF, low frequency information. So A-weighted doesn't get specified a huge amount in our documentation. You'll generally see C-weighted values more commonly. But A-weighted can definitely be useful to us, and we'll get into why that might be. So the final thing to mention with SPL measurement is averaging. So we can measure SPL on most common SPL meters using fast mode or slow mode, or maybe some of them will also have an infinite averaging mode as well. So fast averages over a really short time window to give us an almost instantaneous measure of what's happening pressure-wise in the room at that point in time. But it tends to jump around a lot, so it's not that useful to us in being able to get a stable reading. So for that, we generally use slow mode, which averages over a still relatively short time window, but it just gives us a bit more stability in the reading. Infinite averaging can be useful, but it's not often used by us in kind of studio calibration purposes. So for everything that we're talking about here, slow is the setting to use. Slow is the way to go. Okay, so lots of information. But to recap, SPL is a single figure measurement. We can weight this to focus on the frequencies we're most sensitive to, either by using C weighting or A weighting, and we can measure it using a fast or slow time averaging window. But the thing with SPL as a single numerical value is that it doesn't give us any idea of the underlying frequency balance of the measured signal. For that, we use the RTA measurement, and that is done by filtering the signal by band, and then you present this as a bar graph or as a line graph usually. But the thing here is, like, if you've got two very different signals, like if we take a look at the graphs which are presented here, in theory, I could take out an SPL meter and I could calibrate the left-hand graph to read 85. Or if I've already done my frequency kind of EQ calibration, I could calibrate the signal on the right-hand side, to be 85. Well, one of them is right, or maybe neither of them are quite right, actually. But it's really important because the SPL figure in and of itself doesn't give us any understanding of what the frequency balance is. It's really important that we do our EQ calibration before we do our final level setting. Okay, so let's move on to target curves. Now, the first point to clear up, and this is a very common misconception, that a target curve is not an EQ curve. We're not taking the system and applying the target curve as an EQ filter on top of it. in many rooms, you might actually find that the native out-of-the-box response of the speaker might already be pretty close to the target curve. If so, then great, job done, don't have to do anything. We've already hit the target without touching anything. But usually there's a few things that do need to be addressed. So in the example that I've got here, this was a real room that I set up relatively recently. And aside from the large lump in the low frequency, there's very little actually that needed to be done with EQ to get to the speaker to hit pretty close to the target curve. But folks in general, I think, can be a bit unsure about target curves in general, especially when looking at the HF roll-off. That tends to be the thing that kind of concerns them or worries them, or they're a little unsure about. Often, though, in our experience, or my experience in particular, is that I think that's because folks think that their system is flat, because that's maybe what the speaker's spec sheet shows. Now, as soon as you put a speaker into a room, the room is going to start affecting things. And what people think of as flat, in a lot of cases, can simply actually mean there's no EQ applied. It's just the out-of-the-box response of the speaker. But what we see here is a speaker in a room with no EQ. There's room happening to that signal. So there's a big LF bump. So generally the process here is we would apply some EQ to tame in that low frequency lump. And usually the response from the studio owner is, great, I can hear the low end. It sounds much better. It sounds much tighter. The second comment is often, the room sounds brighter. Well, that might be so, but we haven't actually touched the low frequency. Well, we've only touched the low frequency. We haven't touched the HF yet at all. It's just that it might sound brighter now because the high frequency is not being overwhelmed and swamped and masked by the boomy low end. So actually often, once you've reined in the bottom end, the HF does need a bit of softening to be able to retain a kind of nice, pleasant balance to the room curve. And before you know it, you've actually ended up somewhere that looks pretty similar to one of the target curves. So, well, what are the target curves and how do they differ from one another? So the first one and the most common one, the kind of original one, if you like, is the theatrical cinema X curve. And this is in fact where 85 as a target SPL comes from. So if you add up all of the energy which exists underneath that theatrical X curve, then you get very, very close to 85. There's a bit of a rounding error, but it's pretty much bang on 85 SPL. There's loads of papers out there if you want to dig into the history, including one by Dolby's Johan Allen. She wrote for the SMPTE Motion Imaging Journal in 2006, which describes the origins of the X curve. So if you want to dig into that, then please go ahead. But to distill things down, what you really need to know is that the steepness of the roll-off of these target curves is a function of room size and decay time, so reverb time, both of which kind of play into one another. So as you can see with the modified X curves, if I overlay these on top of the main X curve, the smaller rooms, you get a shallower roll-off. And for even bigger rooms, there's the 1,000-seat curve there presented underneath the main X curve. You get an even steeper still roll-off. And then we get also the Dolby Music curve. So this does somewhat look similar to the X curve, but what you can see here when it's plotted next to the X curve, the music curve has an even softer roll-off, even than the 30-seat curve. So it really actually isn't that severe at all. And in a lot of cases, we see rooms which just out of the box will present a room response which matches pretty closely to the roll-off of the Dolby Music curve. Now, a few things to note here is that the music curve was something that we developed in partnership with labels and studios. And the main thing is that it was a solution to be able to provide confidence in translation. And we devised it and created it through a whole host of empirical testing with various music mixes and studios aligned to the same response. The little LF boost that we see below 160 hertz is something that we see in many existing stereo rooms. So it's something that we wanted to retain. And the HF roll-off kind of works in the kind of size room that you'd expect as like a large format midfield monitoring room, something by about sort of 18 by 20 feet, something in that kind of range. So whilst we recommend this as a starting point, in rooms that are particularly large or reverberant, or on the other end of the scale, smaller, kind of drier, more direct rooms, you might want to apply a steeper or a shallower HF roll-off, and that can be done to taste. In a lot of cases, we see smaller rooms than what we'd expect based on the fact that this was derived from kind of midfield, large format monitoring rooms. If you're working in a room that's smaller than that, using kind of near field or smaller midfield speakers, then it would be very common to have a kind of out of the box response of those speakers in that room environment, which has a softer roll off than what the music curve specifies. We like to have this present in all studios as the kind of go-to reference button. But at the end of the day, it's your studio. It's about making your mixes translate to the real world. And this is where the kind of subjective part of the criteria comes in. You can adjust this to taste. How do we go about calibrating a system, and when might we want to choose kind of this idea of flat versus a target curve? Well, often what I will do is calibrate the system pretty tightly up to the knee at around about 1.6 to 2K, depending on the target curve that's being followed. And then once you've tightened up that kind of low to mid band, just let the speaker do what it does above 2K. And as I said before, in a lot of cases, people will listen to that and think the room sounds a bit too bright, and they'll want to bring some of that HF information down and want to roll it off a bit harder. But as I say, that can be kind of done to taste. We recommend the music curve, but if you want to deviate from that slightly, totally up to you. Okay, so with that, we've covered SPL, we've covered target curves, which are definitely not EQ curves. Don't make that mistake. So let's finally cover off how they kind of interrelate with one another, and why does level setting actually end up being a bit more complicated than we might have realized otherwise. So, well, we know from before, and we mentioned this earlier on, that with the Cinema X curve, when we add up all the frequencies and all the energy that exists below that target curve, that's what gives us our 85 dB SPL reference level. Well, if you take that as a very, very exact line, I don't think we're ever going to see exactly that ruler flatter response in the real world. But if we try and get the measurement to sit kind of as much above the line as below the line, then that should all average out and kind of give us something pretty close to 85. But we've also seen that different target curves have got different roll-offs. So therefore, when you're rolling more or less energy out of the system, there's going to be more or less energy present there. So actually, it's only the theatrical X curve, if we meet that exactly to the line, that's going to give us 85. Remember, we looked at the 30-seat curve and also the Dolby Music curve. Both of those have got more energy present. So we then end up in this situation where actually we can't necessarily satisfy both things. We can't necessarily satisfy an SPL target value of 85 as well as satisfying the RTA trace exactly hitting the target curve. As I said, X curve is 85. By the time we've got the little LF bump and the extra HF energy in the music curve, that actually comes out about just shy of half a dB higher, so about 85.4-ish SPL, something like that. And then if we calibrate totally flat, a lot more energy there in the top end, it's going to be something up or even above 86 dB SPL. So yeah, we find ourselves in the situation where we can't necessarily satisfy both. Now, this doesn't necessarily matter per se, but if we want to have multiple presets in our system, then the flatter one will have more energy. It will give a higher SPL. But then if we apply the HF roll-off and then try and calibrate that to the same SPL, what we're actually doing is we're changing all of those other frequencies as well. So we're turning the whole system level up or down to try and match this single SPL value. So in that scenario where we've got multiple presets, what we generally recommend is focus on the kind of critical midband, the bit of the frequency range that doesn't change between those presets. So from 125 to the 2K midbands, you want that region to stay consistent between the presets. So the only thing that changes when you toggle between them is the HF slope and the HF roll-off. Nothing else will change in that kind of critical midband. That might mean that you're no longer matching both signals and both speakers to exactly 85, but the main thing here is that you only want to change the thing that changes, and that's the HF slope. So kind of ignore to some degree what the numerical SPL value tells you, and you want to be trying to match the different traces from the different presets across that mid-band region. And then the final point to mention here is that, especially in smaller rooms, it's very, very common to see room mode cancellations. And depending on the size of the room, those cancellations can extend very high in frequency, maybe 150 hertz or even higher in really small rooms. So when that's the case, there can be really large chunks of energy that are missing from the measurement. And that will cause the single SPL figure to be a lot lower than it should, because you've got all of this information that should be here is now missing, right? So considering that, the only way to chase that 85 SPL value would be to turn up all of the other frequencies which are present to offset the average, considering this region here is missing, right? So that just has the result that all of the other frequencies end up too loud compared to what they actually should be, to try and compensate for this missing energy, which is down to the room acoustic, right? There's nothing really we can do with that. So in this sense, this is where using the different weighting curves can be useful, or different weightings for the SPL measurement. So this is very rough and ready overlay. It's not to scale and it's not accurate, but I kind of cobbled it together to kind of prove the point here. So what you can see here is the C weighting curve up here does take into account all of this low end energy, whereas the A weighting curve here starts to disregard, or it starts to weight down a lot of the lower frequency information. So in smaller rooms, this is the reason why A weighting can be helpful to us. It can disregard some of the low frequency kind of modal problems that we see and give us a more readable, more reliable measure of the relative level between speakers within that system. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So in summary, based on what we've discussed, this is kind of our guidance when it comes to level setting your system. So let's just recap. So 2 loudspeakers in the system may produce a matching SPL value, even though they've got very different frequency balances, and we can observe that using our RTA analysis. You should therefore want to calibrate for frequency response before doing your final level setting to make sure that they're going to match up as well as possible. You can't necessarily satisfy both 85 as an SPL target as well as the target curve, depending on which you've chosen. Remember, the target curve, all of the energy present underneath that target curve is what dictates what the SPL value is. If you've got more energy in one and less in another, they're not going to match up necessarily. So you can't necessarily satisfy both. So you want to work with both C-weighted and A-weighted values to try and find the right balance, but also doing that whilst observing what the RTA trace is doing. And if you're setting up multiple presets, then you want to be observing that region between 120 and 2K. Keep that as your reference. And to some degree, you can kind of disregard what the actual numerical SPL value is. It's a really good idea to avoid chasing matching meter values across all the loudspeakers. It can be helpful if you've got a really well-balanced room, but most rooms have got some issues, some acoustical anomalies, and that's going to cause variation in the SPL measured value. So chasing the value too hard can actually kind of counterintuitively give you a more perceptually unbalanced room, especially if you've got loads of low-end challenges and issues in the room acoustic. And the very last point, and this is something which I always finish any kind of technical discussion with, is use your ears. Your ears are sensitive enough to even relatively small level variations. Once you've ironed out all that rest of the inconsistency in the frequency response, your ears are sensitive enough to be able to detect even very small level variations. So once you've done all of this technical analysis, use the rotate control in the Dolby renderer speaker calibration window, and it's absolutely fine to nudge channel levels around by a few tenths of a dB here and there until you get something which perceptually matches. All of the technical work we do at the end of the day is to enable you to be able to work creatively on actual content. It's not for listening to pink noise on. So yeah, if you follow all of these tips and use some of the information, you'll be able to get a studio that is well level balanced, and yeah, you'll be able to deliver great Dolby Atmos content.
Totally awesome. I mean, really, like, that's a quick masterclass in calibration, and we can't really talk enough about why it's so important to reinforce calibration, right? To ensure translation, and when it comes to room alignment and SPL loudness, curves and level setting. I mean, you've answered a lot of the questions that many people regularly have out in the field, of course, which you see all the time and on these community sessions. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot more. So please add your questions for Rich, Emma, and Greg here now. And once again, Rich, Addis, thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right. Let's jump into Q&A now. Thank you, everyone, for all of the fantastic questions that have been submitted so far. Lots of action. Good to see everybody. We've got Rich, we've got Greg, Emma's here in spirit as well. So let's jump into these. The first one here I can take from Matthew. Will there be a link to an archive of this event if I miss it? Absolutely, Matthew. All the sessions are available at our playlist. If you go to Dolby's YouTube page and search for Music Community Sessions, they're all there. And I'll also pop a link into the chat as well. Make sure you have those. And let's move on to next question here for Greg from Guatam. Interesting question here, Greg. Why is listening to music in Dolby Atmos still painful to achieve in home audio systems? When will the dependencies with the hardware, software, codec, services, subscriptions, license, and etc. reduce?
Sounds like someone needs to go to the doctor. No, it's a great question. I would say that, if we think about, where things are in terms of the consumer space, it's actually quite a lot easier today than it was, a year ago, even 2 years ago. There's more than 4 billion devices in market right now. So from, sound bars, AVR, speakers, automobile, headphones are included there. It's actually getting quite a lot easier and less expensive to be able to properly, listen to and monitor and enjoy Dolby Atmos at home or even on the go. So, in terms of like the dependencies with the hardware and software and codecs, that's all done by the manufacturers. They do that work and kind of behind the scenes to make sure that you, the consumer, the listener, the fan, have an easy way to kind of be able to consume and enjoy Dolby Atmos. So it's a lot easier. And as these things go, I mean, Dolby Atmos certainly on the music side is still relatively young. But we're seeing there's a really good, robust ecosystem around this, so less painful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you mentioned 3.5 billion devices and 20 plus streaming music services globally. There are now 30 automobile manufacturers announced are on the road today. Thousands of cinemas. So there's a vast ecosystem. And I think, sometimes it's regional in some people's minds, but it is a global ecosystem that always begins with the creator. So, I encourage you to check out music.dolby.com or dolby.com to see a little bit of the partner ecosystem and the breadth of that. There's a lot there as well. And certainly check out Dolby's YouTube channel for a lot of content that is worldwide as well, including, showcases with some of our partners. So check that stuff out as well. All right. Rich, over to you for one from Jacek. What is your opinion on having identical speakers in an Atmos setup compared to using larger fronts with smaller sides, surrounds, and height speakers? What challenges do you see in timbral matching when mixing different loudspeaker models in an Atmos room? So kind of two-parter for you.
Yeah, sure. Really good question. I think the first thing to say is that having kind of larger format LCR and then smaller surrounds and overheads is a very, very common configuration. We try and steer people towards staying within the same brand line or the same kind of model range within that brand, because generally you'll get pretty good kind of timbre match across those different speakers. There can be some things around kind of matching phase profiles, especially if you've got 3 ways up front and 2 ways for the surrounds, for example. But the reality is, are you going to notice those issues? A graph will tell you that there's issues, but will your ears and will your brain tell you that there's issues? I think the main thing is to try and make sure that you're keeping consistency throughout the room. So like LCR, you'd want those to be all the same wherever possible, and then just make sure everything else is kind of matching pairwise through the room. There's always going to be some inconsistencies. I think I would kind of caveat this by saying how the speakers are installed in the room is probably going to have more impact on the end result of the sonics of that space than the different model of speakers. So you've got, instead of two speakers, we're used to just putting them on stands and sitting symmetrically in the middle. We've got different speakers, different brands, sometimes different models, different distances, different mounting conditions, different distances to the hard surfaces, different kind of reflection profiles on whatever the first surface that's going to interact with. We see this a lot in stereo rooms. They're kind of designed to be kind of energy entering in from the front of the room, but you put speakers at the back and point them at the front of the room. It's going to interact in ways that are maybe unexpected. So I think the differences that you're going to get through a mismatch of the individual model of speaker are going to be one of a whole host of things that are going to impact the sonics of the experience. So where you can, and if you can and you've got the space and the budget to match every speaker, then great, perfect. But if not, don't sweat it too hard.
Awesome, thank you. Sticking with you, Rich, from Panos, asking about alternatives to Smart. What's the best practice to calibrate your room if you don't have software like Smart to work with?
So the reason that we use Smart is primarily because we like the fact that you get really quick feedback. It's a live analysis tool. There's other things out there and other free options. So Room EQ Wizard is the one that kind of comes up most often. That will give you pretty much all of the same information that Smart will. It's just a slightly slower process where you have to sweep the room, take the measurement, analyze the result, make a change, sweep it again to see what the result is. Smart is a fantastic and incredibly powerful tool. A lot of the feature set is probably overkill, frankly, for a lot of what we do in the studio and kind of recorded music space, as opposed to live. But we value the live feedback, which is why we use it. So yeah, Room EQ Wizard, also another very good option.
Great, thank you. One for you, Rich, on curves from Lon. What is the justification for applying the X curve in studios creating content at a small room home theater?
Yeah, super good question. I think I touched on this in the pre-recorded section. So it is something where people do like the confidence of checking what it's going to sound like with that specific curve shape. But I think once we understand the reason and the provenance of curves and why we have that roll off in the top end in the first place, we can start understanding a bit more about what's going to cause translation and what isn't going to help with translation. So putting a full cinema X curve in a small cutting room isn't necessarily going to promote translation. It's about counteracting the characteristics of the room to be able to allow you as the mix engineer to hear through that. So if you calibrate your system with a full hard X curve in a really small room and find it doesn't translate into a big room, soften off that HF slope in the small room. That's probably going to get you a better translation from a small room to a big room than trying to mix into the full big room X curve. As I said in the pre-record, it's a function of room volume primarily and the decay time of various frequencies. So it's not as simple as just whack the cinema X curve on and it'll translate. You kind of need to factor in the physical size of the room, the reverberant characteristic of the room as well. So it's not quite as one size fits all as the published information around curves might necessarily lead you to assume.
Great stuff. Thank you. Greg, over to you for a couple, and we're going to rapid fire through a few of these. And of course, Rich, please chime in as well if you'd like, sir. From Miguel. So Greg, how will this new platform help with music projects?
I think the first thing is the having that space, the immersive space, to be able to just really kind of tell that creative and musical story is the thing. So that's how I think it helps with music projects. I think that's the simplest way to kind of answer that one.
How will this new platform incorporate the new plugin format, CLAP?
Yeah, Clap is a really great newer plugin format. So that kind of joins the kind of the standard AAX, VST, AU plugin formats. It's really great format, very efficient, really great in terms of CPU usage and stuff. In terms of the tools, that's really up to the developers. So if third party or the plugin developers choose to build their plugins on that platform, then they're available, regardless of whether those are stereo plugins or multi-channel plugins or Dolby Atmos specific tailored plugins. We Dolby ourselves, while we built the Panner, we have built plugins in the past. In terms of what happens in the market or in the actual space, that's really up to the developers, but they're enabled to do so. And I'd love to see some Clap plugins leveraged in some Atmos productions.
Cool. And then one kind of on conceptual sort of career path. How can music producers ride on this wave and enter into the world of cinematic production?
I think that's pretty much the same as it was, if you were working in 5.1 or working in stereo, I think first and foremost, that's relationships and skill set. So, kind of getting your skill set up to par in what's happening, the core concepts and the working concepts around Dolby Atmos, in your DAW and in your space. I think that takes you quite a long way. And then it's really community. And if you're a music producer or engineer wanting to do something more in post, it's getting out and shaking hands, kissing babies.
I think one of the really great things about this is that the tool set is identical, right, across different content areas, whether it's film, TV, gaming, podcasting, or music. The Dolby Atmos renderer solution and the way that it's integrated in the DAWs is exactly the same across all of them. So once you've learned that skill set in Dolby Atmos for one kind of content area, totally interchangeable to all others.
Nice, thank you. And this question from Bo kind of ties in a little bit with what Mikhail was asking, and that's how does Dolby help me with creation? And guys, feel free to jump in, but obviously we talk about this on the sessions all the time, and one of the goals of the sessions is to help make the resources available to people and point to them where they can find them. So, I mean, we have a number of resources, all of which are free at learning.dolby.com with the Atmos and Vision and mix room design courses and training. You can go to dolbycreatorlab.com where there's the Artist Accelerator course and videos. Of course, our knowledge base, FAQs, and forums are at professional.dolby.com. There's quick start videos there and deep dive videos. All of it's free, but they also are constantly evolving, which is great. So there's a lot of interaction from people in the community, asking for the most recent tools and resources on how to use them. So I would encourage you to stay up to date with professional.dolby.com, as a starting place, and you can kind of link to all of those other spots from there. I think this one was kind of answered in the chat, but Greg, if we want to quickly hit, how do you get a certification from Dolby, and and if the DART is showing that the room is configured correctly, is that enough?
Yeah, not exactly sure what you mean by is that enough for kind of moving forward. So let me start with that one. If the DART is showing that the room is configured correctly, is that enough? Well, yeah. I mean, so obviously there are things you're contending with. There's the angles, the size of the room, the speakers you're using, SPL. So all of these things kind of aggregated. The DART kind of really helps to kind of cover everything. You do want to make sure, hopefully, you're working with, if you're able to, working with an acoustician, working with a really good, room design integrator. If you're doing it all by yourself, the DART is a really good place to kind of aggregate all that information and make adjustments as needed. In terms of certification, so there is no real certain, Dolby doesn't actually certify rooms or engineers or anything like that. However, taking this course that Emma spoke about, again, really great way to gain information. You do get a notification of completion, but it's not an actual certification that you can have a plaque printed or something like that. But it is a really great resource, and I've taken it and recommending it to everyone.
Cool. Thank you. A couple more here, guys, and then we'll wrap up. Greg, I think you kind of answered this one from Martins. He's asking, I'd really love to know how the cinematic sound design is achieved using Dolby Atmos on Pro Tools DAW. So I think you kind of touched on that one in your last question.
I just added a link to the Creator Talks. Rich was kind enough to remind me of that. So there's a link to that, and there's some great talks there.
Perfect. Thank you. Rich, one for you from Ellis. Can I build two from Ellis? Can I build a room that can do both theatrical and home theater Atmos? And we get this one a lot.
Yeah. So we have a very specific certification and approvals program for theatrical dub stages, which can actually deliver theatrical content. The cinema version of the Dolby Atmos renderer is kind of kept under lock and key for those studios which have the certification and approval. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through to be able to do that. But and I think this is probably what the question is gearing towards, is can I build a room which will allow me to pre-mix content which can then go into a theatrical dub stage? So a theatrical kind of pre-mix room. Now, the main difference when we look at the room design specification tends to be around the speaker positioning, in particular, the height of the surround speakers. So for home entertainment, we expect the speakers to be at ear level. So the DART kind of specifies that at 1.2 meters from the floor level. Whereas for cinema, because you've got to cover and project over a much bigger audience area, they tend to be higher up the walls. So I generally, and we get this question a lot, I generally tell people to steer their design towards whichever one they're going to use more. So if you're going to primarily use it as theatrical premix, put the surrounds higher up the walls. If it's primarily a studio for HE use, put them where they should be. As I said in a couple of questions back, the tool set, at least from the DAW's perspective, it doesn't know whether it's the cinema renderer or the HE renderer, which is on the back end. So everything that you're doing in the Pro Tools session side or DAW session side is going to be the same. It's just whatever renderer it hits on the back end, and then obviously into the speaker configuration that you've got. So there's ways to do it. There's definitely ways to do it. I think if you've got specific design questions, then just reach out to whoever your local contact is and we can help advise in the right direction, or to your local CSP contact as well. They should be able to help steer you in the right direction around speaker placement.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's do a couple more and let's try to fly through them. So many great questions. Thank you, everybody. One more from Ellis here, Rich. If I do a 916, is the outermost ceiling speaker placement the same as a 714, as in the 4 in the ceiling instead of 6? Outermost speaker ceiling placement.
You put me on the spot. I think so. I would need to go back and just verify that within the technical specifications, though. What I would suggest, though, is put the information into the DART. The DART will be your source of truth there. The DART obviously just formalizes all of our tech spec documentation into a handy tool. Rather than a 128 something page PDF, you can get a kind of a reference design in kind of under a couple of minutes using the DART. So if you toggle the DART back and forth between 916 and 914, I think the outermost overheads stay in the same position. But yeah, I'd have to defer to the tech spec on that. But all of that's available on professionalsupport.dolby.com in the room design section.
Cool, great, thank you. For either of you gentlemen, how can I test the max SPL of my monitors? I'm thinking maybe Rich, you want to take this one. The manufacturer mentions a specific value at 1 meter, but doesn't disclose what signal was used. Should I just trust the manufacturer's values?
Yeah, good question. I think I have to just answer that as, yeah, you probably have to trust the manufacturer's specification or reach out to the manufacturer directly. If the loudspeaker information is within the DART database, all of that information has been provided by the manufacturer themselves. So again, the DART is the source of truth on that. If it's not in the DART, your best bet is to reach out to the manufacturer directly.
Great. Thank you, Ilias, for that question. One from our friend Alex Gamble. What are your thoughts on all-pass phase filters, such as with tools like in Trinov? in a Trinov?
Yeah, so I guess the question here is kind of one of the big features of the Trinov is kind of enforcing phase linearity on the system, whether or not the speakers that you're using necessarily are linear phase in and of themselves. I think they do a fantastic job. I think there's other ways to achieve good calibration results. I think whether or not linear phase is important to you or whether it's unimportant to you, that's kind of a choice for you yourself. It's kind of personal preference in large part. I think generally you might find.
Oh, I think we lost Rich.
You lose him? All right, well, we'll move on to...
So depending on whether you need to... Did you lose me for a sec?
Nope, you're back. Just for a second. Please continue.
Okay. Yes, you might find that you get additional latency through the system using a system like that. So it depends whether you you need low latency monitoring paths for tracking, for example. Yeah, I think horses for courses is the very wide-ranging answer that I can give to that.
Great, thank you. Rich, how many microphones would you recommend in a room tuning? I've seen between 1 and 5 for a wider sweet spot. This from Omar.
Yeah, sure. So everything that we covered today in the pre-record was about SPL setting. So if you're setting SPL, you only really need to worry about the center mic. But obviously, when you get into kind of taking RTA measurements and looking at the frequency response of the space, then you can just use one mic, but it's only going to tell you what's happening at exactly that point in space. Now, you can prove this to yourself by just moving the mic by, I don't know, a couple of inches, and it will measure something pretty different. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can either run a single microphone and put it in infinite average mode and move the microphone slowly around the space to try and get an average reading across a larger area. Or what we do on larger calibration jobs is we would use an array of microphones, and in Smart you can mux those together and look at the average. So I would tend to suggest somewhere between 5 and 7 microphones, depending on the size of space that you're covering. Yeah, perfect. More mics gives you a better average over a larger area without having to get up and move the mics around. But yeah, as I say, just to repeat that point, anything which is time alignment wise and anything which is SPL wise, you're just looking at the center microphone anyway.
Great, thank you. Couple more and then we'll wrap. Dino with a question for Rich, and I can put a link to our careers page here. What are the requirements for internships in Dolby Atmos in Dolby Labs for international students? And I will go ahead and pop in our careers and internships link, and there's a lot of information there.
Yeah, I think most of the information is going to be on that link. At least within Europe, all of our vacancies for internships are posted on our LinkedIn kind of recruitment page. And we have internships across various countries and regions where we have Dolby offices. So yeah, I think best thing to do is just defer to the page that Ben has posted. And if you have any specific questions about a specific opportunity, then just reach out to the recruitment contact on the LinkedIn advert.
Perfect, thank you. From Paul, just asking for your opinion on the absolute necessity of a dedicated sub speaker in a home-based studio for music production only. Yes.
Necessity of a sub speaker. Okay, so for where to start here, the Dolby Atmos specification expects that you're going to have full range reproduction in every speaker position. Now, there was a question earlier on about the use of kind of larger format monitors at LCR and then smaller monitors in the surrounds and overhead positions. So if you've got some speakers in LCR which can extend down to kind of 20, 30 hertz pretty effectively in and of themselves, then great. But if you pair them with smaller speakers for the surrounds and overheads, then they're not going to be able to deliver the promise of that full range reproduction. So whether or not you're using a sub for LFE, and I appreciate this question is framed specifically around music mixing, where the use of the LFE tends to be a lot lower in level than what you would see with the kind of red lights on the sub that you might get in kind of theatrical post-production mixing, then yeah, you don't necessarily need, in principle, a sub which can deliver exactly what you would need for film mixing. But I always caveat this with Atmos is Atmos, regardless of content area. So you might use your room 99% of the time for mixing music, but that one day that you want to watch a Hollywood feature film in your studio, you're going to feel the sub being underwhelming if it's not hitting the specification requirements. So again, the DART is your source of truth on this. I think if you're underpowered on the LFE, specifically for music mixing, and it's your studio and you're happy with that, and you know you're going to mix lower level, maybe accept kind of -3, -4 under the requirement. If you're building a commercial studio, it has to hit that best practices specification, because you're hiring it out to other people maybe who are going to expect that kind of performance level out of the system. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Great answer. Yep. All right, last question, and then we will wrap. Rich, is there a measurement microphone and preamp combo that you prefer?
We stay as agnostic as possible. There's lots of fantastic microphones and preamps out there. The ones that we tend to steer people towards for use with Smart, if you look at the Rational Acoustic website, there's a couple of interfaces which do have some integration directly with Smart. So we've used the Roland Octacapture for a long time. Fantastic interface, small form factor, 8 mic pre's, everything you need for a calibration. Unfortunately, I believe that
it's not,
about to say the Roland Octapre is discontinued.
It's discontinued. It's no longer available. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got a red banner saying my network connection dropped, so sorry about that. Yeah, I believe it's end of life. You think you can still get hold of it, but the Audient interfaces, the Evo interfaces also have some smart integration. And then on the microphone side, we tend to use Bayer Dynamic MM1s, but other measurement microphones are out there. The one thing I would say though is you can spend a lot of money on a measurement mic. What we're doing is using pretty high level steady state noise. So having a super sensitive mic, which can give you really, really accurate readings at super low levels, like environmental noise measurements, not necessarily required for this kind of work. So yeah. Amazing. There's some options.
This has been a masterclass. Rich, thank you so much for all of your time and expertise. Wonderful presentation. Just thrilled to have you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, not at all. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks, Greg, too.
Greg, Stryke, Chin, as always, my friend, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rich. It's been great.
And thank you, everyone.
And thank you,
for all
Emma.
of the amazing
Who was
questions.
in with us.
Yes, and Emma. Yes,
And
John.
Emma as well. As always, she'll join us next time. All right, everybody. Thank you. We're going to wrap. Check out our YouTube channel for the repost. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.